Welcome to Messages from the Universe with Laurie Wondra. Laurie is an internationally renowned psychic medium, author, and shamanic practitioner, sharing insights from angels, guides, wisdom keepers, and teachers of the universe that help you navigate life's mysteries and transformations.
Hello, I am Laurie Wondra, and thank you for listening. Today, I want to talk about my backyard, a fox, a deer, the choices that we have before us as we go into August, and learning from nature. Now, one of the greatest teachers we have is nature. Long before I studied technology or had a degree in anything science, I was in nature. I grew up outside of the city. My parents were nature lovers. We traveled quite a bit. But from a standpoint of long before books, podcasts, social media, humanity learned by watching the seasons, the stars, the animals, and the rhythms of Earth. Indigenous cultures around the world understood that nature was not separate from us. It was speaking to us. Every migration, every bloom, every storm, every animal encounter held the potential to become our teacher. So whether you believe animals arrive through divine timing or simply happen to cross your path, there is value in asking, what might I learn from this? This inspired my latest book, Messages from the Universe, where I talk about how the universe is always communicating to us. But sometimes the message isn't about predicting the future. Sometimes it's about helping us understand ourselves. And recently, today as a matter of fact, I witnessed an encounter that felt like one of those conversations where normally I would plan to be outside and active. I was kept inside simply because of all the fires and the smoke and the air quality is hazardous levels. So I was on my treadmill on my upper level of my home and looking out into my beautiful backyard, which faces a forest or a reserve area. And suddenly I saw a fox quietly enter my backyard, march around, explore a little bit, and then turn and disappear back into the woods. Moments later, a deer burst from those same woods, obviously alerted and startled. So I thought maybe the fox had stirred it up or scared it. It paused, looked back towards the trees, almost like it was stressed, and then it quickly returned back into that same forest area. But it wasn't a minute or two later, it darted back out once more. It hesitated again, and finally it turned around and disappeared back into the woods. It left me pondering, were there two deer? Did the fox scare two deer or one deer? But watching this interaction unfold, I realized this wasn't simply about a fox or a deer. It was a story. It was an interaction. And perhaps it is also a story that many of us are living right now. The fox, well, this to me is wisdom. The fox arrives first. And if I apply this to where we are right now, particularly the August time period, I can look at it this way. In many spiritual traditions, the fox has long been regarded as a messenger of intelligence, adaptability, discernment, observation, and quiet wisdom. And unlike animals that rely primarily on strength or speed, the fox survives through awareness. It pays attention to subtle movements, changing conditions, and opportunities that others may overlook. It reminds us that wisdom is often found not in doing more, but in seeing more. The fox is also considered a creature that moves comfortably between worlds. It is equally at home in daylight and in darkness, in open fields and in dense forests, and has often been associated with crossing the threshold between the physical and the unseen. Those are the realms I'm very comfortable walking in. In mythology and folklore, the fox appears as a guide through uncertainty, not because it provides all the answers, but because it teaches us how to navigate the unknown with the intelligence rather than any fear. And one of the fox's greatest lessons is timing. The fox rarely wastes energy. It doesn't chase every movement or react to every sound. It waits. It observes. It listens. It understands when to remain hidden and when to step out into the open. Every movement has purpose. Every decision conserves energy for what truly matters. How different this is from the pace of our human modern lives. Many of us feel pressure to make decisions immediately, respond to every text message, seize every opportunity, or solve every problem at the moment it appears. We often mistake activity for progress and urgency for importance. But the fox gently reminds us that not every opportunity requires immediate action. Not every question demands an instant answer. And not every uncertainty needs to be resolved today. Sometimes the wisest response is simply to become the observer. Now, the fox teaches us that awareness always precedes wise action. Before making a choice, gather more information. Before speaking, listen. Before reacting, ask what is truly happening beneath the surface. The answers we seek often reveal themselves when we stop trying to force them. This lesson, I feel, is especially meaningful as we move through the powerful energies of August 2026. The Lion's Gate, active each year around August 8th, is often viewed as a period of expanded consciousness, heart-centered awareness, creativity, and spiritual awakening. Whether one interprets this gateway literally or symbolically, it encourages us to elevate our perspective and to become more aware of the patterns unfolding within our lives. Now, this year, only days later, the solar eclipse, which is actually August 12th, acts as a cosmic reset. Eclipses have long symbolized endings, beginnings, revelations, and moments when hidden truths emerge into the light. They often illuminate situations we could not previously see or bring unexpected opportunities that redirect our path. This fox reminds us that when new information appears, our first response need not be immediate. Sometimes clarity arrives in stages at a later point. Now, at the same time, in August, Saturn continues asking humanity to mature. Saturn teaches responsibility, patience, discipline, and the willingness to build something lasting rather than something that's merely exciting. It rewards thoughtful decisions over emotional reactions. Now, Neptune, meanwhile, continues dissolving illusion. Beliefs we once held with certainty may begin to soften. Dreams may begin to shift. Relationships may reveal new truths. Old stories seem to dissolve, and we may briefly feel uncertain about what is real. The fox teaches us to not panic during these moments of uncertainty, but to trust that greater clarity is emerging. Pluto continues its long work of transformation, reshaping collective systems, personal identities, and our relationship with power itself. Pluto rarely asks for small adjustments. It invites profound evolution. Yet even during periods of deep transformation, the fox reminds us that change doesn't always require force. Sometimes transformation begins with observation, simply noticing what no longer fits before deciding what comes next. And together, these planetary influences create a month that doesn't reward impulsive decisions or dramatic reactions. Instead, they invite us to cultivate the very qualities embodied by the fox: patience, awareness, discernment, adaptability, and quiet confidence. And perhaps the greatest gift of the fox is this: not everything that appears requires your immediate response. Not every invitation deserves your attention. Not every conflict needs your participation. And not every door that opens is yours to walk through. The fox teaches us that true wisdom is knowing the difference. So as August unfolds, consider becoming a student of the fox. Spend a little more time observing before speaking. Listen to the subtle messages arriving through your intuition, through your dreams, and even through nature itself. Notice the patterns that repeat. Notice what surprises you. Notice what quietly asks for your attention, because awareness is often the first step towards transformation. The fox understands something our souls are learning this month, that the universe is always speaking, and wisdom belongs not only to those who seek the answers, but to those who have learned how to truly listen. Now, where does the deer fit? Well, the heart meets the unknown. This is the deer emerging from the woods quickly, its body alert, its senses fully engaged. It was obvious that something had shifted within its awareness. Yet what caught my attention wasn't simply that the deer appeared, it was what happened next. It didn't simply run away, it stopped. It looked back towards the woods. It cautiously stepped back into the trees. And then moments later, it emerged again. It paused once more, scanning its surroundings before finally choosing to return back to the forest. And watching this unfold, I realized I wasn't just witnessing the behavior of a deer. I was witnessing a lesson in discernment. Spiritually, deer have long symbolized gentleness, compassion, intuition, innocence, grace, sensitivity, and the remarkable courage to remain open-hearted in an uncertain world. And across many cultures, the deer represents the heart, our capacity to love, to trust, to forgive, and move through life with kindness rather than fear. Yet gentleness is often misunderstood. Many people confuse gentleness with weakness, sensitivity with vulnerability, kindness with passivity. The deer reminds us that none of these are true. A deer survives not because it is the strongest animal in the forest, but because it is deeply aware. Every sound, every scent carried on the wind, every movement among the trees becomes part of its understanding of the world. Its sensitivity is not a flaw, it's its greatest strength. And perhaps the same is true for us as humans. Many highly intuitive people spend years believing they're too sensitive. They feel the emotions in a room before anyone speaks. They notice subtle shifts in people's energy. They sense when something isn't quite right, even if they cannot explain why. And for much of life, they may have been told they were imagining things, or overreacting, or taking everything too personally. But what if sensitivity is not something to overcome? What if it's something to honor? The deer teaches us that awareness begins with sensitivity. You cannot perceive what you refuse to feel. And as I watched the deer move back and forth between the woods and the open space of the backyard, I couldn't help but think how often we behave in exactly the same way. Life presents us with something new, maybe a relationship, a career opportunity, a move, a calling of some sort, a spiritual awakening, and we take this step toward it. Then uncertainty arises, questions appear, old fears begin speaking, so then we retreat, not because we've failed, not because we've chosen the wrong path, but because we're gathering more information. We step forward again. We hesitate, we look back, we reassess, and eventually we decide whether to continue moving into the unknown or return to what feels familiar. There's wisdom in this process. Modern culture often celebrates quick decisions and unwavering confidence as though certainty is the hallmark of success, yet nature rarely moves this way. Seeds germinate beneath the soil before breaking through the surface. Seasons gradually transform the landscape. Even rivers find their course through patient persistence rather than force. And the deer reminds us that our soul moves in rhythms rather than straight lines. Growth is rarely immediate. Transformation is seldom linear. Sometimes the most courageous things we do is pause long enough to hear our own inner knowing. The deer wasn't simply frightened, it was discerning. There is an important difference. Fear reacts. Discernment observes. Fear runs blindly. Discernment pauses. Fear assumes the worst, but discernment gathers information. Fear closes the heart, but discernment protects the heart while allowing it to remain open. That distinction may be one of the greatest spiritual lessons available to us during the energies of this August. As eclipses illuminate hidden truths and planetary alignments encourage profound change, many people will find themselves standing between what has been and what is becoming. And like the deer, we may feel the tension between stepping forward or turning back. There may be moments when the future feels exciting one day and uncertain the next. That doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. It may simply mean your soul is learning how to move consciously instead of automatically. The deer reminds us that intuition is rarely loud. It speaks in subtle impressions. Might be a feeling in your heart, a quiet hesitation, a deep sense of peace that arrives without explanation. And these gentle nudges often become our greatest guides if we're willing to trust them. The deer's repeated movement between the forest and the open backyard also reminds us that transformation often happens at the edge between the known and the unknown. The forest, in this case, represents mystery, the unconscious, and all that has yet to be discovered. Those things we can't see, but we know there's something there. The open field represents clarity, visibility, consciousness, and awareness. I can see everything. We are rarely asked to live entirely in one or the other. Instead, life continually invites us to move between them, explore what is unknown while remaining anchored in what we know to be true. And perhaps that's why the deer did not simply flee. It paused, it looked back, it considered, then it chose. Choice is where spiritual growth becomes embodied, not because every choice is perfect, but because every conscious choice teaches us something about ourselves. Perhaps that is the deeper message the deer offers all of us this August. Sensitivity is not weakness. Compassion is not being naive. Gentleness is not passivity. Your heart was never meant to be closed in order to stay safe. It was meant to become wise. And as we move through the season of change, may we learn from the deer to trust our instincts without becoming ruled by fear. Let us remain compassionate without abandoning discernment and to recognize that sometimes the wisest path might not be the quickest one. It is the one we choose after listening deeply to both our intuition and our soul. The deer demonstrates something many of us are learning this year. The heart does not lead us away from wisdom. When balanced with awareness, it becomes one of wisdom's greatest expressions. Now, where did the woods come into this? The entering of the unknown. Well, as I continued watching, something else became very clear to me. The fox disappeared back into the woods, and then moments later, after its cautious dance between curiosity and caution, the deer also returned to the trees, and the encounter was over. As much as I wanted to see both or either of them back in my backyard became very quiet again. The birds remained singing. The wind moved gently through the leaves as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet something within me knew the lesson wasn't quite over. In many ways, it was just beginning. It wasn't the fox that stayed with me. It wasn't even the deer. It was the forest, the trees, the unknown. Both animals had emerged from it. Both animals returned to it. And it made me wonder if perhaps the greatest teacher this morning wasn't either animal at all, but the place from which they came. Throughout human history, forests have carried deep spiritual meaning. Long before cities and schools and sacred buildings, people entered the woods seeking something they could not find anywhere else. The forest became a place of vision quests, solitary prayer, healing, initiations, transformation. It was where people left behind certainty and discovered a deeper relationship with themselves, with spirit, and with the living world. I know me personally, I spend lots of time out in nature, in places that are not highly explored. And perhaps this is why nearly every culture tells stories about forests. Every myth has a forest. Every hero eventually walks into one. Fairy tales begin there. Mystics retreat there. Prophets receive revelations there. Shamans journey there. Monks seek silence there. The forest is never simply a collection of trees. It is a symbol of the unknown. It represents the part of life we cannot fully control, the questions that have not yet been answered, the future we cannot yet see, the parts of ourselves we have not yet discovered. And when we think of forests spiritually, we often imagine becoming lost, but perhaps we understand what it means to be lost. Sometimes we are not lost because we've wandered off the path. Sometimes we're lost because the old path no longer leads where our soul intends to go. The forest asks something that our modern world rarely asks. Can you continue walking even when you cannot yet see the destination? Can you trust your intuition when there are no signs pointing the way? Can you remain open when certainty disappears? And those questions feel especially relevant as we move into extraordinary energies of August. In many ways, August itself feels like entering a sacred forest. The familiar landworks begin to shift. Old ways of thinking no longer seem to fit. The future has not yet fully revealed itself. We stand somewhere between what has been and what is becoming. And this is where many people find themselves today. Perhaps life has changed unexpectedly. Perhaps relationships are evolving. Perhaps work no longer fulfills you in the same way. And perhaps your spiritual beliefs are expanding beyond what once felt very certain. Perhaps you're simply sensing that something new is trying to emerge, even though you cannot yet describe what it is. If so, you are not alone. You are simply standing at the edge of the woods, a portal, a gateway. I often talk about portals and gateway, and the Lion's Gateway, celebrated each year between August 8th and August 12th, symbolizes expanded awareness, heart-centered consciousness, creativity, and spiritual possibility. Whether viewed through an astrological lens or a symbolic lens, or simply as an intentional time for reflection, it does remind us that every awakening begins by becoming willing to see beyond our current perspectives. It's that invitation to step beyond the familiar trail. Only a few days later, the solar eclipse on August 12th arrives. Now, eclipses have fascinated humanity for thousands of years because they interrupt what normally appears predictable. The familiar light changes, shadows fall where they're not expected, and something temporarily disappears so that something new can eventually emerge. Spiritually, eclipses often mark thresholds. They reveal hidden truths. They close one chapter while quietly opening another, like entering a dense forest. We may not immediately understand why something is changing. Only later do we recognize that what felt like uncertainty was actually a redirection. Then as August draws towards its close, the lunar eclipse invites another kind of wisdom. If the solar eclipse on the 12th represents new beginnings, the lunar eclipse on August 28th asks, what are we finally ready to release? Old fears, old identities, old expectations, old stories about who we thought we had to be. Like leaves falling from the trees before winter, not every part of our past is meant to accompany us into the next season of life. And at the same time, Saturn continues teaching responsibility and spiritual maturity, and Neptune gently dissolves illusion, asking us to distinguish fantasy from genuine intuition. And then Pluto continues reshaping both our collective world and our personal identities, inviting transformation that reaches beneath appearances and into the very foundation of our lives. Taken together, these planetary movements create something incredibly remarkable. They create a forest, not literally, of course, but symbolically, a place where old maps no longer work, where certainty gives way to curiosity, where listening becomes more valuable than knowing, where intuition becomes more reliable than habit. This is not a punishment. It's an initiation. Nearly every spiritual tradition describes a period when certainty disappears before wisdom arrives. Moses wandered the wilderness. Buddha left the palace before awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert before beginning his public ministry. And many indigenous traditions send seekers alone into nature to discover who they truly are beyond the expectations of family and society. Again and again, the pattern repeats. Before revelation comes uncertainty. Before clarity comes surrender. Before becoming comes unbecoming. Nature demonstrates this every single year. Seeds disappear beneath the soil before becoming flowers. Caterpillars dissolve completely before emerging as butterflies. Trees stand barren through winter before bursting into new life each spring. Transformation rarely announces itself with certainty. It begins in the unseen. And perhaps that's why both the fox and the deer returned to the woods. Neither remained in the open field. Neither stayed where everything was visible. Both instinctively understood that growth continues within the mystery, and perhaps our own souls understand this as well. There are seasons when life asks not to have all the answers, not to rush towards certainty, not to force clarity before it naturally arrives. Instead, we're invited to trust that something meaningful is unfolding beneath the surface. Like the deer, we may find ourselves stepping into unfamiliar territory, cautiously testing what feels safe while listening carefully to our inner guidance. Like the fox, we're learning to navigate uncertainty with wisdom and patience and quiet confidence rather than the urgency or fear. The forest reminds us that the unknown is not our enemy. It's often the birthplace of our next becoming. So, if August feels uncertain, if you feel yourself standing between endings and beginnings, if the path ahead seems less defined than the one behind you, take heart. You may not be lost at all. You may simply have entered the sacred woods. And if you walk with awareness, trust your intuition, and allow yourself to become a student of both mystery and nature, you may discover what countless seekers have learned before you. The forest never intended to keep you. It came to transform you. When you finally emerge, you will not simply have found your way. You will have discovered a deeper version of yourself, one that could only have been revealed by the journey through the trees. As I reflected on this encounter between the fox and the deer, I realized that something that hadn't been obvious while I was watching it unfold. The lesson wasn't the fox. The lesson wasn't the deer. The lesson was the conversation between them. The fox never chased the deer. The deer was never harmed. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything changed. The mere presence of the fox altered the awareness of the deer. Isn't that often how awakening begins? We sometimes imagine that transformation must arrive with fireworks, a dramatic spiritual experience, or an unmistakable miracle, or a life-changing event that divides our lives into before and after. Occasionally it happens that way, but more often, however, awakening is remarkably quiet. It begins with a conversation that lingers in our thoughts long after it ends. The event itself may not be the transformation. It's the awareness the event awakens within us. Nothing about the fox physically changed the deer. What changed was the deer's perception. Its awareness expanded. It began paying attention, perhaps in a different way. And perhaps that's exactly what the universe is inviting each of us to do during this energy of August. The Lion's Gate expands awareness. The solar eclipse reveals what's been hidden and opens new beginnings. The lunar eclipse later in the month invites release and completion. Saturn continues asking us to become spiritually mature. Neptune continues to dissolve illusion gently, encouraging us to distinguish between fantasy and truth. And then Pluto continues reshaping the structures upon which we've built our lives, inviting transformation from the inside out. And these planetary influences are not asking us to become someone different overnight. They're asking us to become more conscious. And consciousness always begins with awareness. The fox represents wisdom entering our awareness. The universe will help us, giving us wisdom, granting us access to wisdom. The deer represents our emotional and intuitive response. One teaches us to observe, the other teaches us to feel. The deer, feel with your heart. Stay in your heart. Don't let fear shut you down. One gathers information, the other reminds us to trust the heart. Neither is complete without the other. Wisdom without compassion becomes detached and cold, while compassion without discernment becomes vulnerable and easily manipulated. Observation without feeling leaves us disconnected from our humanity. Feeling without observation can leave us overwhelmed by emotion. Spiritual maturity asks us to hold both, to think clearly while loving deeply, to remain open-hearted without abandoning your healthy boundaries, to trust intuition while also practicing discernment, and to respond consciously rather than just reacting automatically. Perhaps this is one of the greatest invitations of August, not to become more spiritual, but to become more aware. Many people ask me what the energies of August are trying to teach us, and if I could summarize the month in one single sentence, it would be this: pause before you choose. Pause before you choose. We are living through extraordinary times. The world is changing. Communities are changing. Technology is changing. Relationships are changing. Our understanding of health and purpose and success and spirituality continues to evolve. So pause before you choose. Many people are discovering that the beliefs and identities they carried for decades no longer fit the way they are now. That realization can feel really unsettling. When familiar structures begin shifting, our first instinct is often to react. Too many quick decisions, forcing certainty, choosing immediately, simply because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But nature rarely works that way. Seeds are never rushed. The moon never hurries through its phases. A tree does not bloom because the calendar says it should. Everything unfolds according to its own divine timing. And the fox understands timing. The deer understands awareness. Together, they remind us that our soul also unfolds in seasons. August is not a month that rewards impulsive action. It rewards conscious awareness. Notice what repeatedly captures your attention. Notice the conversations that continue echoing in your mind. Notice the unexpected opportunities that appear. Notice the people who enter your life. Notice the ideas that refuse to leave you alone. Notice where you feel both excitement and hesitation. These moments are often invitations rather than interruptions. The universe is rarely shouting. More often, it's whispering. It speaks through synchronicities, through dreams, through intuition, through relationships, through unexpected events and endings, through surprise beginnings, and sometimes it speaks through two animals meeting in a quiet backyard. One of the reasons I've spent so much of my life studying nature is because it continually reminds me that we're not separate from creation. We are participants within it. Everything is communicating. The changing seasons teach us about cycles of growth and release. Sunrises remind us that every day offers another beginning. Storms teach resilience. Rivers teach surrender. Mountains teach patience. And the stars remind us to look beyond ourselves. Animals, too, become teachers, not because they consciously intend to deliver messages, but because they embody qualities we often forget within ourselves. The fox? Well, he was simply just being a fox. The deer was simply just being a deer. Neither was performing. Neither was trying to become something it wasn't. Neither questioned its own purpose. Neither compared itself to the other. The fox never apologizes for being wise, and the deer never apologizes for being gentle. Each trust their gifts, the gifts that they've been given. And perhaps that is where their greatest teaching also lies. So much of modern life encourages comparison. We wonder whether we're spiritually enough, successful enough, healed enough. Did we get the message right? Are we awakened enough? We compare our journey with someone else's and assume we should be moving at the same pace, but nature never compares. The oak tree doesn't envy the pine tree. The river does not wish it were a mountain, and the eagle certainly does not question the songbird. Each fulfills the purpose for what it was created, and perhaps our own spiritual path is much the same. The goal is not to become someone else. It is not to imitate another teacher, another healer, another mystic, or another spiritual leader. It's not even to become a more perfect version of ourselves. Our work is remembrance, to remember the wisdom our soul already carries, to remember the gifts we came here to express, to remember that our uniqueness is not something to overcome, but it's something to embody. So as August invites us through its gateways, its eclipses, and profound opportunities for transformation, perhaps the greatest lesson of the fox and the deer is just beautifully simple. Observe like a fox, feel like a deer, walk courageously into the unknown forest, trust your own timing, listen more deeply than you speak, choose consciously rather than react impulsively, and remember, everything in this life is a conversation between our soul and the world around us. And the question has never, ever been whether the universe is speaking. The question has always been whether we are quiet enough to hear its whisper. Are we listening? Are we watching? Are we observing? Are we trusting who we are and the path that we're on? I'm Laurie Wondra of Your Life Core, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Messages from the Universe. For information about Laurie Wondra's current events or to schedule a private session, visit her website, yourlifecore.com. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. Laurie also shares inspirational and informational messages on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening.